When the forest keeps its greatest secret, even kings can mistake silence for peace. Dawn arrived wrapped in silver mist as the first rays of spring sunlight touched the ancient towers of Whitmore Keep. Across the kingdom, families dressed in their finest clothes, children carried woven baskets filled with white lilies, and musicians tuned wooden flutes that had only been played once each year for a single sacred celebration. Every generation remembered the same promise. On the first morning of spring, the sacred stag would emerge from the heart of the elder forest, step into the valley of light, and remind the kingdom that nature and its people still lived in harmony. For centuries the tradition had never been broken. The appearance of the magnificent white stag marked another year of peace, healthy harvests, gentle rivers, and forests that welcomed both wolves and travelers alike. Long before sunrise, hundreds gathered quietly beneath flowering maple trees lining the valley. No one spoke above a whisper. The air smelled of fresh earth, blooming wildflowers, and morning dew resting upon emerald grass. Elder Benedict stood beside the ancient stone altar with weathered hands folded together while priests lit fragrant cedar incense that drifted lazily into the cool air. High above, colorful birds usually circled the valley before the sacred stag appeared, filling the morning with bright songs that echoed across the hills. But today something felt different. The birds never came. The wind moved gently through the branches, yet every nest remained strangely quiet. Even the rabbits that usually wandered fearlessly across the meadow stayed hidden beneath tangled roots. A silence unlike anyone had ever known settled across the valley. It was not peaceful. It felt as though the forest itself had paused to listen for something that never arrived. Standing near the front of the gathering, Alpha King Nathan Whitmore slowly lifted his eyes toward the narrow trail leading from the elder forest. He wore a dark royal cloak trimmed with silver, but beneath his calm expression rested growing concern. Every year since childhood he had watched the sacred stag step gracefully into the morning light before lowering its noble head toward the kingdom. Every year the crowd welcomed it with grateful smiles rather than cheers, honoring the quiet dignity of the ancient guardian. Today the trail remained empty. Minutes passed. Then another. The golden sunlight climbed higher, illuminating every blade of grass, yet the forest entrance stood completely still. Soft murmurs spread through the crowd as uncertain glances passed from one face to another. Mothers gently pulled children closer. Elder Benedict quietly lowered his head, listening as though hoping to hear distant hoofbeats that never came. Nathan stepped forward until he stood at the very edge of the tree line. Towering oaks stretched endlessly before him, their fresh spring leaves glowing in the early light. Nothing moved. No birds took flight. No deer crossed between the trunks. The entire forest seemed to be holding its breath. Behind him, one of the royal captains spoke carefully. "Your Majesty, should we begin searching?" Nathan kept his eyes fixed upon the silent woods. Not yet. He had learned long ago that sacred places answered patience more willingly than haste. Another long moment slipped away beneath the warming sun. Still nothing. Finally Elder Benedict raised his weathered voice, though sadness lingered within every word. "In all my years, I have never witnessed the sacred stag miss the first morning of spring." The valley fell completely silent once more. Nathan slowly turned back toward the gathering. Worry now rested openly across every face. Some whispered about forgotten legends. Others quietly wondered whether the kingdom had somehow lost nature's blessing. Nathan refused to allow fear to spread before truth. "The celebration ends for today," he announced calmly. "No one is to enter the elder forest alone. We will learn why the sacred stag did not come." The people nodded respectfully before beginning the slow walk back toward the castle, though many looked over their shoulders one last time, hoping to catch even the faintest glimpse of white antlers between the trees. None appeared. As the valley gradually emptied, the breeze carried a single pale feather across the meadow before letting it settle beside the abandoned flower baskets. Far beyond the place where every eye had been searching, hidden deep within the oldest part of the forest where no festival had reached for generations, something unseen quietly watched the kingdom, waiting for someone who would notice not what had disappeared, but why. By late afternoon, the excitement that had filled Whitmore Keep only hours earlier had quietly faded into uneasy whispers echoing through its stone corridors. Emma Carter carried a woven basket filled with freshly gathered herbs along the narrow path leading to the castle's healing garden, unaware that nearly every conversation around her centered on the same troubling question. Where had the sacred stag gone? She paused beside a weathered stone fountain where clear water usually flowed with a cheerful rhythm throughout the spring months. Today the stream moved more slowly than she remembered, its gentle song softened to little more than a quiet murmur. Emma rested her fingertips lightly against the cool stone edge, listening instead of simply looking. Something about the water felt different. It was still clean, still clear, yet strangely hesitant, as though its journey beneath the earth had become more difficult. She glanced toward the surrounding flower beds where clusters of white lilies should have been opening beneath the warm afternoon sun. Many remained tightly closed despite the season. Nearby, honeybees drifted lazily between blossoms before suddenly changing direction and disappearing toward the western edge of the forest. Emma watched them thoughtfully. She had cared for the castle's healing garden for nearly 3 years, and nature had quietly taught her that living things often noticed changes long before people did. She continued tending rows of lavender, sage, and wild mint, carefully removing dry leaves while humming softly to herself. A pair of bluebirds landed on the garden fence only for a moment before lifting into the air again without touching the nearby birdbath. Even the squirrels gathering acorns beneath the old oak tree seemed unusually restless, repeatedly stopping to stare toward the distant elder forest before vanishing into the branches. None of these signs appeared dramatic on their own. Together, however, they formed a pattern that gently unsettled her heart. As the afternoon sun lowered across the castle walls, Emma filled a small wooden watering can from the fountain and slowly walked through the herb beds. She noticed that the rosemary nearest the western path drooped slightly despite receiving enough sunlight and water. Kneeling beside the plants, she pressed one hand against the rich soil. It felt cooler than usual. Not frozen. Simply lacking the quiet warmth that normally returned each spring. That is strange, she whispered to herself. An older gardener passing with a wheelbarrow smiled kindly. Talking to the flowers again, Emma? She returned the smile without embarrassment. Sometimes they answer. The gardener chuckled warmly before continuing his work, believing she had simply made another gentle joke. Emma looked back toward the forest. Deep inside, she wished it had been a joke. Later that evening she carried a basket of fresh herbs toward the castle infirmary, passing several servants discussing the missing sacred stag in worried voices. One insisted it must be a terrible omen. Another claimed hunters had surely frightened it away. Emma listened quietly but said nothing. None of their explanations matched what she had seen throughout the day. The forest had not looked frightened. It had looked as though it were waiting. After leaving the infirmary, she chose the longer path home that bordered the outer woods. Warm golden sunlight filtered through towering maple trees while a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and damp earth. Normally birds filled this trail with constant songs before sunset. This evening only silence greeted her. Then she noticed something almost invisible beneath the fresh grass. Tiny deer tracks crossed the path before stopping suddenly without turning in any direction. Emma crouched for a closer look. The earth beyond the final hoofprint remained perfectly untouched. No broken branches. No signs of panic. No predator tracks. It was as though the animal had calmly chosen not to take another step. She slowly lifted her eyes toward the quiet forest ahead. Somewhere beyond those ancient trees, countless small changes were weaving together into a story no one else seemed to notice. Emma could not yet understand what the story meant, but for the first time since the sacred stag failed to appear, she no longer believed it had simply disappeared. She believed the forest was trying to say something, and she quietly promised herself that she would keep listening until she finally understood. The following morning arrived beneath a pale sky brushed with thin ribbons of cloud, and although spring sunlight reached the highest branches of the elder forest, the kingdom still carried the quiet weight of unanswered questions. Before most of Whitmore Keep had awakened, Alpha King Nathan Whitmore had already assembled a small patrol in the castle courtyard. Horses stood saddled beside the stone gate, their breaths rising gently into the cool morning air. Captain Rowan adjusted a leather map case across his shoulder while several experienced forest rangers quietly prepared supplies for what everyone believed would be a simple search. Nathan fastened the clasp of his dark traveling cloak and looked toward the distant tree line where the sacred stag had always appeared every spring. This time the familiar path remained empty beneath the morning light. "We begin with the northern trails," he said calmly. "Search carefully. Leave every living thing undisturbed. If the sacred stag chose another path, the forest will tell us where." The riders nodded before following him beyond the castle walls. Their horses moved steadily beneath towering oaks whose fresh green leaves shimmered softly in the gentle breeze. Everywhere Nathan looked, the forest appeared healthy at first glance. Ferns stretched across the woodland floor. Wildflowers bloomed beside winding streams. Sunlight filtered peacefully through the branches above. Yet after several hours, an uneasy pattern slowly emerged. Deer trails ended without warning. Birdsong faded whenever the patrol entered certain clearings. Small woodland animals watched silently from hidden places before disappearing without making the usual rustling sounds among the leaves. Captain Rowan dismounted beside a narrow stream where delicate hoofprints rested in the damp soil. "Fresh tracks," he said with cautious optimism. Nathan knelt beside them. The marks belonged to a young deer rather than the sacred stag, but something immediately drew his attention. The hoofprints continued for several yards before stopping completely near a cluster of moss-covered stones. Beyond them, the untouched earth showed no sign that the animal had changed direction or continued walking. Nathan slowly stood. "Another trail that simply ends." Rowan frowned. "We found 2 others like this farther east." Nathan glanced toward the silent trees. The mystery was growing instead of shrinking. By midday the patrol had explored streams, open meadows, rocky hillsides, and ancient hunting paths used for generations. They discovered no broken branches suggesting panic, no signs of hunters, and no evidence that the sacred stag had wandered beyond the kingdom. Everything seemed strangely undisturbed. It was as though the forest had carefully hidden something rather than lost it. Hours later the riders reached the Valley of Whispering Pines, where the tallest trees in the kingdom swayed gently above carpets of emerald moss. Nathan paused his horse and listened. The wind moved through thousands of branches, yet almost no birds answered. "Do you hear that?" he asked quietly. Captain Rowan tilted his head before slowly shaking it. "I hear only the wind." Nathan remained thoughtful. "Exactly. Normally this valley echoed with robins, finches, and woodpeckers from sunrise until evening. Their absence felt louder than any sound." As the afternoon light softened, the search party reluctantly turned back toward Whitmore Keep, carrying nothing except unanswered questions. Nathan spoke little during the journey home. Every clue they had found seemed to lead nowhere. Every trail ended too neatly. Every familiar place felt subtly incomplete without revealing why. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the forest, Emma Carter carefully gathered fresh chamomile blossoms beside a quiet stream while studying another set of delicate hoofprints pressed into damp earth. Unlike the ones Nathan had discovered, these prints were accompanied by something almost invisible. Tiny branches along the edge of the path had been bent gently inward instead of broken, forming a subtle line that seemed less like random growth and more like a quiet invitation. Emma slowly followed the direction they pointed until the trail disappeared beneath hanging vines that concealed an older pathway almost completely reclaimed by nature. She stood silently before the hidden entrance, her blue eyes filled with thoughtful curiosity. While the kingdom searched every place marked on its maps, the forest appeared to be whispering that the answer had never been waiting on any map at all. Emma Carter stood motionless before the curtain of hanging vines while the afternoon breeze gently stirred fresh leaves above her head. Sunlight filtered through the dense canopy in scattered ribbons, illuminating tiny floating seeds that drifted silently across the forgotten path hidden beyond the greenery. Few people ever wandered this far into the elder forest. Most believed the old trail had vanished generations ago after storms and creeping roots reclaimed it. Emma had walked these woods since childhood collecting herbs, Yet she had never noticed the narrow opening until the strange pattern of bent branches quietly led her there. She carefully pushed the vines aside with both hands. Behind them stretched an ancient stone path almost completely covered by moss and soft emerald ferns. Weathered markers lined its edges, their carved symbols softened by centuries of rain and sunlight. Nothing appeared damaged. Instead, everything seemed patiently preserved, as though the forest itself had chosen to hide this place rather than abandon it. Emma stepped forward slowly, making sure not to disturb the delicate wildflowers growing between the stones. The air felt noticeably cooler beneath the towering trees. Around her, the familiar sounds of the outer forest gradually faded until only the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant murmur of moving water remained. She paused beside a fallen oak where fresh hoofprints rested upon damp earth. Her blue eyes studied them carefully. Unlike ordinary deer tracks, these prints were larger and perfectly balanced, each step spaced with calm, even rhythm. There were no signs of running, stumbling, or fear. Whoever had walked here had done so peacefully and with purpose. Emma followed the trail deeper into the forgotten woods. Every few yards she noticed another quiet detail. Wildflowers along the path all faced the same direction despite the changing sunlight. Ferns bent gently toward the center of the trail as though greeting someone who passed often. Even delicate spider webs remained untouched across nearby branches while the path itself stayed remarkably clear. It felt less like a road used by travelers and more like one quietly maintained by nature alone. As she rounded a gentle bend, the sound of flowing water grew louder. She expected to find a lively stream sparkling beneath the spring sunshine. Instead, she discovered a narrow creek moving far more slowly than it should. Smooth stones that were normally hidden beneath clear rushing water now rested partly exposed above the surface. Emma knelt beside the stream and dipped her fingertips into the cool current. The water remained crystal clear, yet its gentle pull felt weaker than she remembered. She looked upstream. Tiny ripples continued winding between moss-covered rocks before disappearing beneath a wall of ancient roots farther ahead. "Where are you trying to go?" she whispered softly. A pair of butterflies drifted across the creek before suddenly changing course toward the same hidden direction the bent branches had indicated earlier. Emma quietly rose and continued walking. The forest grew brighter instead of darker, as though shafts of golden light had found small openings high above the canopy. Then she stopped. Resting upon a bed of fresh green moss lay a single white feather unlike any she had ever seen. It shimmered faintly beneath the sunlight, impossibly clean despite the damp forest floor surrounding it. Emma carefully knelt beside the feather without touching it. Nearby, another perfectly shaped hoofprint rested beside the moss. Then another. She slowly lifted her gaze. The trail continued ahead through a natural arch formed by intertwined branches, disappearing into a soft silver mist. At that very moment, somewhere far behind her, Alpha King Nathan Whitmore and his patrol completed another unsuccessful search along the well-traveled northern trails, believing every important corner of the Elder Forest had already been explored. Emma did not know where the hidden path would lead, nor did she realize she had quietly stepped beyond every map preserved inside the royal archives. She only knew that with every careful step forward, the forest felt less like a place hiding a missing guardian and more like a living guide patiently leading her toward a truth that had never been lost, only waiting for someone willing to notice the smallest signs everyone else had walked past. The hidden trail wound deeper into the forgotten heart of the Elder Forest, and with every careful step Emma Carter felt as though she had crossed into a place where time itself had chosen to slow down. The air carried the clean fragrance of damp moss, cedar bark, and blooming woodland flowers untouched by travelers for countless seasons. Sunlight filtered through towering ancient trees in soft golden beams that illuminated tiny drifting seeds like floating stars. Nothing here felt abandoned. Instead, everything seemed quietly protected. Emma continued along the moss-covered stone path, her woven basket hanging lightly at her side, though she had long forgotten the herbs she had originally come to gather. Her attention belonged entirely to the subtle language of the forest. A family of rabbits emerged from beneath a fern only to pause and watch her without fear before disappearing farther down the trail. High above, two bluebirds landed on a low branch and chirped softly, then flew ahead together as though inviting her to continue. She smiled almost unconsciously. The forest no longer felt silent. It felt patient. After several more minutes, the narrow pathway opened into a breathtaking clearing unlike anything she had ever seen. At its center stood an enormous ancient oak whose trunk was wider than the castle gate itself. Its roots stretched across the earth like gentle waves frozen in time, embracing carpets of emerald moss and clusters of tiny white flowers blooming in perfect circles. Around the great tree, dozens of woodland animals rested peacefully together. Deer grazed quietly beside foxes. Squirrels gathered acorns only a few feet from gentle hares. Songbirds filled the lower branches instead of hiding among distant treetops. Emma stopped immediately, unwilling to disturb the extraordinary peace surrounding them. None of the animals fled at the sight of her. Instead, many simply lifted their heads with calm curiosity before returning to whatever they had been doing moments before. It felt less like entering a wilderness and more like quietly stepping into a sanctuary where fear had never learned to exist. Then she noticed something even stranger. Every animal in the clearing seemed to glance toward the same direction every few moments, almost as though waiting for someone to arrive. Emma slowly followed their gaze. Beyond the ancient oak, another narrow trail disappeared between graceful silver birch trees where a thin veil of morning mist still lingered despite the advancing afternoon. Soft hoofprints rested upon the damp ground, larger than any she had seen before. They remained perfectly clear, each impression carrying the same calm rhythm she had followed since discovering the hidden path. She knelt beside one print, gently placing her hand nearby without touching it. The earth surrounding the hoofprint remained slightly warm beneath her fingertips, even though the shaded clearing should have been cool. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves overhead. Somewhere beyond the birches came the faint sound of flowing water, quieter than a healthy stream should have been, yet steady enough to draw every living creature toward it. Emma quietly stood and continued walking. As she approached the mist, the woodland seemed to hold its breath once again. Even the birds grew silent, not with fear but with quiet expectation. Suddenly, just beyond the drifting veil of silver light, she caught the briefest glimpse of brilliant white moving gracefully between the trees. It lasted only a heartbeat. A tall figure crowned with magnificent branching antlers stepped into a beam of sunlight before disappearing once more behind the ancient forest. Emma never chased after it. Instead, she remained exactly where she was, her blue eyes filled with wonder rather than excitement. Deep inside, she understood that sacred things could never be found by rushing toward them. They revealed themselves only to those willing to wait. As the mist slowly settled again, a single white petal drifted gently onto her open hand, though no flowering tree stood nearby. Emma lifted her eyes toward the hidden path ahead and realized with quiet certainty that the sacred stag had never abandoned the kingdom. It was still here, watching over something far more important than anyone had imagined, and for reasons she could not yet understand, the forest had finally begun trusting her with the first small pieces of its greatest secret. Emma Carter remained quietly beneath the silver birch trees long after the brilliant white figure had disappeared into the drifting mist. She felt no disappointment. Instead, a deep sense of calm settled gently over her, as though the forest itself had acknowledged her patience. The animals that had paused only moments earlier slowly returned to their peaceful routines. A robin landed upon a low branch above her head and sang a single clear note before flying toward the sound of flowing water hidden deeper within the woods. Emma followed without haste, careful to place each step between delicate patches of wildflowers that covered the forest floor. The narrow trail curved gently around enormous roots before opening into another secluded glade unlike any place she had ever visited. Sunlight poured through an opening in the ancient canopy, creating a circle of warm golden light around a quiet spring nestled beneath towering stones draped with emerald moss. At first glance the place looked beautiful beyond words. Crystal clear water shimmered across smooth rocks while tiny white blossoms surrounded the pool like scattered stars. Yet the longer Emma stood there, the more she realized something was not as it should be. The spring was far too quiet. Water emerged from beneath the stones only in a slow trickle before slipping into a narrow stream winding through the forest. She remembered stories told by Elder Benedict describing this hidden spring as the oldest source of water in the kingdom, the place where countless streams were believed to begin their journey toward every valley and village. Standing beside it now, she realized the flow seemed far weaker than such a sacred place should possess. Emma slowly knelt beside the edge of the spring. She dipped her fingers into the cool water before watching tiny ripples spread gently across the clear surface. There was no sign of pollution or decay. The water remained pure, yet its strength felt diminished, almost as though something beneath the earth struggled to breathe. Her eyes wandered across the surrounding stones until one detail quietly caught her attention. Several smooth rocks near the base of the hillside rested at unusual angles, partly covered by fresh soil and newly fallen branches. Wild moss had not yet begun growing across them, suggesting they had shifted only recently. Emma carefully walked closer. Between the stones she noticed a narrow opening where water should have flowed more freely, yet much of it now disappeared beneath layers of loose earth carried down by an old hillside collapse. She gently brushed aside fallen leaves and listened. Beneath the muffled trickle she could hear the distant sound of stronger water still moving somewhere below, hidden from the surface. "You are still there," she whispered softly. "You simply cannot reach the forest." A gentle breeze stirred the branches overhead. Then, from the opposite side of the clearing, came the quiet sound of measured footsteps across soft moss. Emma slowly turned. Standing within a beam of golden sunlight was the Sacred Stag. Its magnificent white coat glowed with quiet radiance, and its graceful antlers reached toward the canopy like living branches touched by morning light. Calm silver eyes rested upon Emma without fear or hesitation. Neither of them moved. The ancient guardian simply looked toward her, then lowered its noble head before turning toward the weakened spring. It stood beside the stones for several heartbeats before lightly touching one weathered boulder with its nose. Then it lifted its head again and looked back at Emma. No words were spoken. None were needed. She followed the direction of its gaze and suddenly understood. The Sacred Stag had never hidden itself out of fear. It had remained here because it refused to leave the fading spring that nourished the entire elder forest. It had been guarding the kingdom's oldest heartbeat while everyone else searched for it in the wrong places. Emma felt tears gather quietly in her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming beauty of finally understanding what the forest had been trying to say all along. The great stag watched her for another peaceful moment before slowly stepping back into the silver mist. It disappeared as gracefully as it had appeared, leaving only fresh hoofprints beside the quiet spring and a gentle certainty growing within Emma's heart that the true mystery had never been the missing guardian. The real mystery was why the hidden source of life beneath the kingdom had begun slowly fading, and she knew she had to help the Alpha King discover the answer before the silence spreading through the forest reached every corner of the realm. Emma Carter remained beside the hidden spring until the last golden light of afternoon faded beneath the towering canopy. The Sacred Stag had vanished into the silver mist as quietly as it had appeared, yet its silent message lingered in every thoughtful breath she took. She carefully studied the hillside surrounding the spring once more. The shifted stones, the fresh layers of loose earth, and the weakened stream now formed a picture she could no longer ignore. Kneeling beside the narrow opening where clear water struggled to escape, she gently brushed away another handful of damp leaves. Beneath them, she discovered several young roots pressed tightly against newly fallen rocks, still healthy but slowly drying where the current had weakened. The forest had not been abandoned. It had been patiently enduring. Emma rose with quiet determination. She understood that this discovery could not wait. As she turned toward the hidden path leading back through the ancient woods, a familiar sound drifted softly behind her. She looked over one shoulder. Standing at the edge of the clearing once again, the Sacred Stag watched her beneath a beam of fading sunlight. It neither approached nor retreated. Instead, it lowered its magnificent head with calm dignity before lifting its gaze toward the forest beyond, almost encouraging her to continue the journey. Emma placed one hand gently over her heart. "I understand," she whispered. "I will help them understand too." The great guardian remained perfectly still until she disappeared among the silver birches. By the time Emma emerged from the forgotten trail, evening had settled across Whitmore Keep. Warm lanterns glowed beside the castle gates while servants hurried through the courtyard carrying baskets of bread and fresh vegetables toward the kitchens. She walked directly toward the council hall, still carrying the empty herb basket she had nearly forgotten hours before. Inside, Alpha King Nathan Whitmore stood beside a large wooden table covered with maps of the Elder Forest. Captain Rowan, Elder Benedict, and several royal advisors surrounded him, discussing every trail already searched. Emma paused respectfully near the entrance until one of the attendants noticed her. "Your Majesty," the attendant announced softly, "Emma Carter wishes to speak." Several advisors exchanged puzzled glances. Nathan turned toward the doorway with calm curiosity. "Please come in." Emma stepped forward, her boots still carrying traces of moss from the hidden forest path. She lowered her head respectfully before speaking. "Your Majesty, I believe everyone has been searching in the wrong part of the forest." A quiet murmur spread across the chamber. Lord Aldridge, one of the senior advisors, folded his arms. "The Royal Patrol has searched every marked trail." Emma nodded politely. "Yes, sir. But I do not believe the answer is on any marked trail." Nathan studied her thoughtful expression. "Tell me what you found." Emma carefully described the hidden pathway concealed behind vines, the forgotten sanctuary, the spring whose water barely flowed, and the hillside where loose earth had blocked part of the underground source. She spoke simply, never exaggerating what she had witnessed. She did not mention miracles. She only described what her own eyes had seen. When she finished, silence settled over the room. Lord Aldridge slowly shook his head. "With respect, those are observations made during a walk through unfamiliar woods. They do not explain the disappearance of the Sacred Stag." Several others quietly nodded. Emma lowered her eyes, disappointed but not discouraged. Before anyone else could speak, Elder Benedict slowly rose from his chair. His weathered face had grown unusually thoughtful. "Long before our current maps existed," he said quietly, "there were stories of a hidden spring beneath the oldest part of the Elder Forest. Many believed it was only legend because no one had found it for generations." He looked directly at Emma. "Did the water seem weak?" She answered without hesitation. "Yes." The elder turned toward Nathan. "If she truly found that place, then we may finally have our first meaningful clue." Nathan remained silent for several moments, weighing every word he had heard. Then he gently rolled up the forest map resting across the table. "At first light tomorrow," he said calmly, "I will follow Emma Carter to this hidden spring myself." The chamber fell completely silent. Some advisors looked surprised. Others uncertain. Emma simply met Nathan's steady gaze, realizing that for the very first time since the Sacred Stag had disappeared, someone had chosen not merely to hear her words, but to believe that the quiet voice of the forest might still be leading them toward the truth. The next morning arrived beneath a sky washed in soft shades of gold and pale blue as the first light of dawn reached the highest branches of the Elder Forest. Thin ribbons of mist drifted across the meadow outside Whitmore Keep while dew shimmered like tiny crystals upon fresh spring grass. Emma Carter waited quietly beside the western gate with a small satchel holding dried herbs, a water skin, and a hand-drawn sketch of the hidden trail she had carefully recreated from memory the night before. She had not slept much. Not because she feared the journey ahead, but because her thoughts had remained with the quiet spring hidden beneath the ancient trees. Every hour that passed seemed to make its gentle voice call a little louder inside her heart. Moments later, Alpha King Nathan Whitmore crossed the courtyard wearing a simple dark traveling cloak rather than formal royal robes. Only Captain Rowan and Elder Benedict accompanied them. Nathan had chosen to leave the larger patrol behind. "Too many footsteps to disturb a forest trying to speak," he explained calmly when Rowan questioned the decision. Emma looked at him with quiet gratitude. It was the first sign that he truly intended to understand rather than simply inspect. Together they entered the Elder Forest beneath the gentle songs of robins greeting the morning. Emma guided the small group away from the familiar northern trails toward the forgotten western path. At first the journey seemed ordinary. Wildflowers lined the woodland floor, gentle streams crossed beneath weathered logs, and warm sunlight danced through fresh green leaves overhead. Yet after nearly an hour, Nathan began noticing details he had overlooked during every previous search. Deer tracks consistently pointed toward the western woods before quietly disappearing. Birds gathered only along certain branches while leaving entire stretches of forest strangely silent. Even the breeze carried the scent of damp earth more strongly the farther they walked. "You noticed all of this before anyone else?" Nathan asked quietly. Emma nodded. "I did not know what it meant. I only knew the forest kept repeating the same quiet signs." Elder Benedict smiled faintly without interrupting. Soon they reached the curtain of hanging vines concealing the forgotten entrance. Captain Rowan stared in surprise as Emma gently moved the greenery aside, revealing the moss-covered stone pathway hidden beyond. "I have patrolled these woods for 15 years, he whispered. "I never knew this trail existed." Emma answered softly. Perhaps it was waiting until someone stopped looking for the obvious. Nathan studied the ancient path before stepping forward without hesitation. The hidden forest welcomed them with peaceful silence. Rabbits watched curiously from beneath ferns instead of fleeing. Bluebirds flew ahead from branch to branch as though guiding their visitors deeper into the sanctuary. The farther they traveled, the calmer the atmosphere became. Eventually the enormous ancient oak emerged from the morning mist exactly as Emma remembered. Nathan slowed to a stop. Around the great tree, deer rested peacefully beside foxes while birds perched fearlessly upon low branches. No creature showed alarm at the group's arrival. Elder Benedict quietly removed his gloves and bowed his head. "This place," he whispered. "It still remembers the old harmony." Emma gently motioned toward the silver birch trail beyond the clearing. "The spring is just ahead." They followed her until the hidden water source appeared beneath shafts of golden sunlight. Nathan immediately knelt beside the weakened flow. Crystal clear water emerged only in a narrow stream where a stronger current should have filled the basin. Emma pointed toward the hillside where fresh earth and shifted stones rested above the hidden opening. Nathan carefully examined the slope without touching anything. After several thoughtful moments, he looked toward Captain Rowan. "This was not caused by neglect," he said quietly. "A natural landslide redirected the underground channel." Elder Benedict stepped beside the spring, his weathered eyes reflecting both relief and sorrow. "The Sacred Stag never abandoned the kingdom," he murmured. "It remained here protecting the source that gives life to every stream below." Before anyone could answer, a soft rustling drifted through the silver birches. Sunlight brightened across the clearing as the magnificent Sacred Stag slowly stepped into view. Its white coat glowed beneath the morning light while its great antlers reached gracefully toward the canopy above. It looked first at Emma, then at Nathan, before calmly lowering its noble head toward the quiet spring. At that moment, no one doubted the truth any longer. The guardian had not been hiding from the kingdom. It had been patiently waiting for the kingdom to find what truly needed saving. The peaceful silence surrounding the hidden spring lingered long after the Sacred Stag lowered its noble head toward the gentle flow of water. No one spoke. Even the breeze seemed to move more softly beneath the towering branches, carrying only the faint scent of moss, cedar, and fresh spring blossoms. Nathan Whitmore slowly stepped closer to the hillside where Emma Carter had first noticed the shifted stones. Kneeling beside the partially blocked opening, he carefully brushed away loose soil with his gloved hands. Beneath the damp earth, a stronger current could be heard flowing steadily below the surface, hidden from view yet still very much alive. Captain Rowan joined him, studying the narrow passage with thoughtful eyes. "The water never disappeared," he said quietly. "It was trapped." Nathan nodded. "Which means the forest has been surviving on only a fraction of its strength." Elder Benedict rested one weathered hand against the ancient oak overlooking the spring. "Just as a heart continues beating even when its breath grows weak," he murmured. Emma slowly walked along the edge of the hillside, observing the pattern of fallen rocks more carefully. None of them appeared intentionally placed. Their edges were softened by moisture rather than fresh damage, and young ferns had already begun growing between several cracks. She looked upward toward the slope where roots from towering trees stretched deep into the earth. This happened naturally, she said. A section of the hillside must have shifted during the heavy winter thaw. The roots stayed alive, but the underground channel became smaller. Nathan followed her gaze. The explanation fit every sign they had discovered during the past several days. The streams throughout the kingdom had not dried suddenly. They had gradually weakened. Flowers bloomed later than usual because the soil received less water. Birds gathered only where spring still flowed strongly. The sacred stag had remained here because leaving the spring unguarded would have meant abandoning the last fragile heartbeat of the elder forest. As that realization settled over the group, the magnificent guardian quietly stepped closer to the hillside. Instead of looking toward the people, it lowered its head beside one of the largest moss-covered stones resting above the hidden channel. Its silver eyes then lifted toward Nathan before returning to the same stone once again. Emma immediately understood. "It is showing us where the water is trapped," she whispered. Nathan smiled faintly. "Not asking us to follow it anymore. Asking us to help." Captain Rowan examined the surrounding ground with renewed confidence. "If we bring a small team with wooden levers and digging tools, we could remove these upper stones without harming the roots." Elder Benedict nodded thoughtfully. "Carefully, and only by hand. The forest trusted us enough to reveal its wound. We must answer with the same patience." Nathan remained silent for several moments before turning toward Emma. "Without you, we would still be searching empty trails." Emma lowered her eyes with gentle humility. "I only listened." Nathan looked around the hidden sanctuary where deer rested peacefully beneath ancient trees, birds perched quietly above the spring, and sunlight shimmered across the clear water struggling to continue its ancient journey. "Sometimes," he replied softly, "listening is the greatest service anyone can offer." The sacred stag slowly lifted its magnificent head as though acknowledging those words. It looked toward Emma once more before stepping gracefully into the shallow stream. The gentle current flowed around its slender legs, catching tiny reflections of golden sunlight. For the first time since the spring celebration, birds began singing together throughout the forgotten sanctuary. Their voices echoed between the towering trees, no longer carrying uncertainty but quiet hope. Emma smiled as she listened. The forest had not fully healed yet. The water still needed to be freed. The kingdom still knew nothing about the hidden spring. Yet something essential had already changed. Fear had been replaced by understanding. The mystery had become a purpose. As Nathan carefully marked the hillside with simple wooden stakes so they could return at sunrise with the right tools, Emma watched the sacred stag disappear peacefully among the silver birches once again. This time it did not feel like a farewell. It felt like a promise that when people finally chose to protect the source of life instead of merely searching for its symbol, both the guardian and the kingdom would find their way home together. The following sunrise painted the eastern sky with soft amber light as Whitmore Keep quietly awakened to a day unlike any in recent memory. Instead of gathering soldiers or preparing hunting parties, Alpha King Nathan Whitmore assembled a small group of craftsmen, gardeners, foresters, and stoneworkers whose hands had spent their lives building rather than destroying. Each carried simple wooden levers, sturdy ropes, woven baskets, and digging tools designed for careful work. Before leaving the castle courtyard, Nathan addressed them with calm determination. "We are not entering the elder forest to conquer it. We are going there to restore what nature has struggled to protect." Every member of the group nodded silently. Emma Carter walked beside Elder Benedict at the front of the procession, guiding everyone toward the forgotten western trail while morning birds greeted the rising sun with songs that sounded slightly brighter than they had the previous day. When they reached the hidden sanctuary, the workers instinctively lowered their voices. Even those who had never seen the place before immediately sensed they had entered sacred ground. Deer continued grazing peacefully beneath the ancient oak, while bluebirds perched quietly above the spring as though watching the visitors with gentle curiosity instead of fear. Nathan slowly removed his gloves before kneeling beside the weakened water source. "We begin here," he said softly. Captain Rowan organized the workers into small teams. Rather than forcing the stones aside, they first cleared fallen branches and loose soil by hand, carefully protecting every exposed root that stretched across the hillside. Emma moved among them, quietly pointing out young saplings and delicate wildflowers growing between the rocks so no one would accidentally disturb them. Hours passed beneath warm spring sunshine filtering through the ancient canopy. Gradually the blocked channel beneath the hillside became easier to see. Clear water shimmered beneath layers of earth that had settled during the previous winter. Nathan carefully studied the largest moss-covered stone resting above the narrow opening. "This one carries most of the weight," he observed. "If we lift it slowly, the smaller stones should settle naturally." Strong ropes were wrapped around the weathered boulder while wooden levers gently shifted its position a fraction at a time. No one hurried. Every movement was patient and deliberate. Emma watched the exposed roots carefully. "A little farther," she whispered. "Then stop." The workers paused exactly as she requested. For several quiet seconds, nothing happened. Then a deep, gentle sound echoed beneath the hillside like a distant breath returning after a long silence. Tiny ripples spread across the surface of the spring. Another soft rumble followed as trapped water found its ancient path once again. Clear currents began slipping through the newly opened channel, slowly at first, then with growing confidence. The narrow trickle widened into a lively stream that sparkled beneath the sunlight as though thousands of tiny stars had suddenly awakened beneath the forest floor. Emma smiled through quiet tears while Elder Benedict folded his hands in grateful silence. Captain Rowan laughed softly in amazement as fresh water rushed around smooth stones that had not been fully covered for many seasons. Nathan simply closed his eyes for one peaceful moment, listening to the renewed voice of the spring filling the sanctuary with gentle music. As the flowing water strengthened, remarkable changes unfolded around them without haste or spectacle. Wildflowers lifted their blossoms toward the light. Ferns that had drooped slightly the day before seemed to stand taller. Birds returned to nearby branches until cheerful songs echoed throughout the clearing. A family of deer slowly approached the edge of the stream and drank calmly from the fresh current. Then, from between the silver birch trees, the sacred stag appeared once more. It walked gracefully toward the restored spring before lowering its magnificent head to drink from the flowing water. When it finally lifted its eyes, it looked first toward Emma, then toward Nathan, before quietly bowing its noble head to both of them. No words were spoken. None were necessary. The forest itself had become the witness that the hidden source of life had been restored, not through power or glory, but through patience, humility, careful hands, and the willingness to listen when nature whispered instead of shouted. By the time the afternoon sun reached the highest branches of the elder forest, the hidden spring no longer whispered through the ancient stones. It sang. Crystal clear water flowed with renewed strength beneath moss-covered roots before winding through the sanctuary in bright ribbons of silver that reflected the warm light above. Every few moments another gentle ripple spread across the surface, carrying fallen white blossoms downstream as though the forest itself had begun breathing freely once again. Emma Carter stood quietly beside the restored channel, watching the current continue its timeless journey toward the valleys below. She remembered how hesitant the water had seemed only a day before, struggling to find its path through the blocked earth. Now its steady voice filled the clearing with quiet confidence. Around her, small changes unfolded one after another, each so natural that none demanded attention, yet together they transformed the sanctuary before everyone's eyes. Bluebirds returned to branches that had remained empty for days. Honeybees drifted peacefully among fresh blossoms opening beneath the afternoon warmth. Ferns lifted their graceful fronds, and tiny butterflies danced above the flowing stream without fear. Captain Rowan smiled as he watched a family of deer emerge from the trees to drink calmly beside the spring. "They know," he said softly. Elder Benedict nodded with gentle certainty. "Nature always knows when balance returns." Nathan Whitmore slowly walked along the edge of the restored water, carefully studying every detail surrounding the ancient spring. The roots stretching beneath the hillside appeared stronger already, washed clean by the renewed current. Fresh moisture darkened the rich forest soil while delicate moss glowed brighter beneath the sunlight. He realized that the kingdom had nearly mistaken the sacred stag for the source of its blessing when, in truth, The guardian had always been protecting something even greater than itself. It had watched over the living heartbeat hidden beneath the forest floor. Nathan turned toward Emma, who remained kneeling beside the stream, gently lifting a small branch that had floated against the roots so the current could carry it away without obstruction. She did not realize he was watching her. She simply continued caring for the place with the same quiet attention she had shown since the beginning. No audience remained. No questions needed answering. The work itself seemed enough for her. A warm smile touched Nathan's face. Leadership, he thought, sometimes appeared in the smallest acts no one expected others to notice. Suddenly the peaceful birdsong softened. The woodland grew still, though not with uncertainty as before. Instead, every living creature seemed to pause together. From between the silver birch trees, the sacred stag stepped gracefully into the clearing once more. Its magnificent white coat shimmered beneath shafts of golden sunlight while its broad antlers framed the glowing canopy above like living branches. Slowly it approached the restored spring and drank from the flowing water. Then, with calm silver eyes reflecting the bright stream, it lifted its head and walked toward Nathan. The Alpha King bowed respectfully, placing one hand across his heart. The sacred stag remained before him for a quiet moment before gently turning away. It continued walking until it stood directly before Emma. She slowly rose to her feet, her blue eyes filled with quiet wonder. Without hesitation, the ancient guardian lowered its noble head before her. The entire clearing seemed to hold its breath. Captain Rowan looked on in silent amazement. Elder Benedict quietly closed his eyes as though witnessing the fulfillment of an old prayer. Emma did not reach out immediately. Instead, she lowered her own head in return, offering the same respect she had shown every living thing within the forest. Only then did she gently place her fingertips against the soft white fur along the sacred stag's neck. The guardian remained perfectly still. There was no fear. No ceremony. Only complete trust. A gentle breeze carried fresh flower petals across the clearing while sunlight danced upon the flowing water beside them. Nathan understood the meaning of what he had just witnessed. The sacred stag had not honored power, titles, or royal authority. It had honored the heart that listened before speaking, observed before judging, and chose compassion before certainty. As the guardian slowly lifted its head once more and gazed toward the open forest beyond, Nathan quietly realized that the greatest gift Emma had given the kingdom was not simply restoring the hidden spring. She had reminded everyone that the deepest truths could only be found by those humble enough to hear the quiet voices the world so often ignored. News of the restored spring traveled across Whitmore Keep before the sun had fully set behind the western hills, carried not by loud celebration but by quiet wonder. Farmers noticed familiar streams flowing stronger through their fields. Mill wheels that had turned more slowly during recent weeks began moving with steady confidence once again. Children laughed as they watched tiny paper boats drift along creeks that had nearly stood still only days before. Everywhere the people looked, small signs of renewal appeared so naturally that many paused simply to watch the kingdom breathe a little easier. Emma Carter returned to the castle garden the following morning expecting another ordinary day among herbs and flowers. She carried the same woven basket, wore the same simple cream sweater beneath her faded brown cloak, and greeted every gardener with the same gentle smile she had offered long before anyone knew what she had discovered. She knelt beside the rosemary bushes that had first made her question whether something was changing beneath the forest floor. Fresh green shoots now reached confidently toward the morning sun. Nearby, white lilies that had remained tightly closed during the festival finally opened their delicate petals one after another. Honeybees returned in cheerful circles while robins splashed happily inside the stone fountain whose flowing water now sang with bright, familiar music. Emma smiled softly but continued her work without expecting praise. To her, the greatest reward had always been seeing the garden healthy again. Later that afternoon, Alpha King Nathan Whitmore stood upon the broad terrace overlooking the valley where the spring festival had begun only days earlier. The same meadow that had once echoed with uncertainty now shimmered beneath warm sunlight. Birds circled freely above blooming maple trees, and gentle breezes carried the fragrance of fresh blossoms across the hills. Elder Benedict joined him quietly. The kingdom feels different, the old man observed. Nathan nodded. Because the people are finally seeing what was always sustaining them. The elder looked toward the distant elder forest. And because one humble heart chose to notice what everyone else overlooked. Nathan remained thoughtful for several moments before making a decision. That evening he invited the castle staff, village elders, craftsmen who had restored the spring, and many ordinary families to gather within the central courtyard. No elaborate ceremony had been prepared. No banners decorated the walls. Nathan simply stepped forward beneath the golden evening sky while Emma stood quietly among the gardeners, believing she had come only to listen like everyone else. Our kingdom searched for a guardian, Nathan began, his calm voice carrying across the peaceful courtyard. Instead, we found the place the guardian had been protecting all along. Every face turned toward Emma. She lowered her eyes, suddenly uncomfortable beneath so much attention. Nathan continued gently. The hidden spring was restored because someone chose patience over assumption, observation over pride, and compassion over recognition. Emma Carter reminded all of us that wisdom does not belong only to crowns, titles, or ancient traditions. Sometimes it belongs to the person willing to listen when the world becomes quiet. No one applauded immediately. The silence that followed carried something far deeper than surprise. Then one by one, people bowed their heads toward Emma with sincere respect. The gardeners who had worked beside her every day smiled proudly. The craftsmen who had lifted the stones nodded gratefully. Captain Rowan placed one hand across his heart. Even the noble families who had once dismissed the thoughts of a simple Omega quietly acknowledged her with genuine humility. Emma felt warmth rise to her cheeks. She had never sought admiration. She simply hoped the forest would remain healthy. Nathan stepped down from the terrace instead of remaining above the gathering. Standing beside Emma rather than before her, he looked toward the distant hills where the evening light painted the elder forest in soft shades of gold. Far beyond the castle walls, almost hidden among ancient trees, the graceful outline of the Sacred Stag appeared for one brief moment upon a quiet ridge. It watched the peaceful kingdom below before turning calmly back into the forest. This time no one feared its disappearance. Everyone understood that a true guardian never existed to be admired. It existed to protect life itself, and because one gentle Omega had chosen to hear the quiet language of nature, that living promise would continue flowing through the kingdom for generations yet to come. Several weeks passed, and spring quietly unfolded across the kingdom with a gentleness that seemed almost miraculous. Streams that had once hesitated now flowed confidently through every valley, carrying clear water past blooming meadows, quiet villages, and fields where young crops stretched eagerly toward the sun. The elder forest no longer felt burdened by silence. Every morning began with birdsong drifting through the branches, while soft breezes carried the fragrance of cedar, wildflowers, and fresh earth into Whitmore Keep. The people spoke less about the mystery that had troubled them and more about the quiet changes they witnessed each day. Children discovered butterflies returning to gardens that had stood empty only a short time before. Farmers smiled as healthy seedlings covered their fields in bright shades of green. Travelers resting beside woodland streams often paused simply to listen, saying the water sounded happier than they remembered. Emma Carter continued living much as she always had. She still greeted the stable horses before sunrise, still tended the healing garden with patient hands, and still stopped to rescue struggling wildflowers that grew where busy feet might accidentally crush them. Those who passed her now offered warm smiles instead of hurried glances, yet she never allowed recognition to change the gentle rhythm of her days. She believed kindness held its greatest value when it remained unchanged by praise. One quiet morning, while gathering lavender blossoms beneath the castle walls, Emma noticed a familiar white feather resting among the flowers. It looked exactly like the feather she had discovered deep within the hidden sanctuary before the truth had revealed itself. She lifted it carefully and smiled without surprise. Some gifts, she realized, were never meant to be explained. They only needed to be treasured. Later that afternoon, Nathan Whitmore rode alone toward the western edge of the elder forest, leaving behind the formal duties of the castle for a few peaceful hours. He dismounted beneath the ancient oak overlooking the restored spring and quietly followed the narrow trail leading into the hidden sanctuary. Everything appeared wonderfully ordinary. Deer grazed beside foxes without fear. Bluebirds nested among flowering branches. Crystal-clear water danced over smooth stones beneath the towering trees. Nathan stood beside the spring for a long moment before hearing soft footsteps approach through the silver birches. The sacred stag emerged once more, its brilliant white coat glowing beneath scattered sunlight. The magnificent guardian paused beside the flowing water before slowly turning its calm silver eyes toward the Alpha King. Nathan bowed respectfully, placing one hand over his heart exactly as he had before. This time the sacred stag did not lower its head. Instead, it gently looked beyond him. Nathan turned and saw Emma walking quietly along the path carrying only her familiar woven basket. She had not known he would be there. She had simply come to see how the spring was doing. As she approached, the sacred stag stepped gracefully between them before looking from Emma to Nathan and then toward the forest stretching endlessly beyond the sanctuary. A gentle breeze stirred the branches overhead, sending white blossoms drifting across the flowing stream. Without haste, the guardian began walking deeper into the ancient woods. After several peaceful steps, it paused one final time and glanced back. Then it disappeared among shafts of golden light, leaving only quiet hoofprints that slowly faded into the moss. Nathan and Emma remained standing together beside the restored spring. Neither felt the need to speak immediately. They simply listened to the steady voice of the water that had once nearly fallen silent. At last Nathan smiled. "The kingdom searched everywhere for a miracle," he said softly. Emma looked toward the place where the sacred stag had vanished and answered with the same quiet wisdom that had guided her from the beginning. "Sometimes miracles never leave. They simply wait until someone chooses to care for what keeps them alive." Nathan nodded slowly, understanding those words far more deeply than when their journey had begun. Together they watched the sunlight shimmer across the restored stream while birds filled the forest with joyful songs. The sacred stag was no longer visible, yet its presence remained in every living tree, every flowing current, every blooming flower, and every peaceful heartbeat of the kingdom. And from that season forward, whenever the people of Whitmore Keep asked how their land had been saved, they were never told a story about a missing guardian. They were told about an Omega who listened when the forest whispered, an Alpha King who chose to believe her, and the quiet truth that the greatest strength any kingdom could possess would always begin with humility, compassion, and the courage to protect the source of life before seeking its glory.